3 brand new cards are coming to Clash Royale, and today I'm going to show you how to use them, how to counter them, and a lot more. The Goblin cards are going to be added June 17th with the brand new update. We have a 5 elixir legendary card called the Goblin Machine, and this is a troop. We have a 2 elixir epic card called the Goblin Curse, and this is a spell. And then we have a 4 elixir rare card called the Goblin Demolisher. This is another troop. The first card we are going to look at is the 5 elixir legendary card, the Goblin Machine. The Goblin Machine is a melee unit, very similar to a knight, but what makes him unique and what gives him this legendary status is he has a giant rocket on his back. This rocket will hit troops a little bit further away, and it does massive damage, being able to one-shot archers and help your Goblin Machine make it to the tower. This rocket is extremely overpowered because it hits ground and air, and it does splash damage, so you really have to be careful when you're playing against this card that you don't give it crazy good value. Let's take a look at the stats, and you can see the machine itself isn't anything too special. It does pretty low damage, and it has a lot of hit points. The machine itself can only hit ground cards, and it will go after any target. But again, what makes this card really overpowered is that rocket, and here are the stats of the rocket. First of all, this rocket does crazy damage. It can one-shot magic archers, it can one-shot mother witches, and it can't quite one-shot barbarians, but it gets them down to 1 HP, which you can just spell away. Now, there's a very unique mechanic with the Goblin Machine, and that is the rocket range. Very similar to the mortar, how the mortar has a dead zone around itself. So if a troop gets really close to the mortar will just ignore it and go onto your tower. The Goblin Machine works in a very similar way, where if a troop is too close to the Goblin Machine, the rocket will then go to the next target further away. This means you have to be very careful when defending it, because just a knight at the bridge will not cut it. The rocket will then start hitting your tower and deal massive damage. Now, like I mentioned, the Goblin Machine will go after anything, meaning you're able to actually kite it across the arena like a P.E.K.K.A or a giant skeleton. You do have to be a little bit careful though, because the Goblin Machine will actually catch up to the ice golem, and then that rocket will retarget. Obviously, if you place troops around your tower, then the rocket can splash onto your tower. So how do you counter the Goblin Machine? Well, there's actually a few different ways. One of the best ways is to play a knight and then use a musketeer to outrange the rocket. The musketeer range is slightly bigger than the rocket range, allowing you to snipe the Goblin Machine. As well, even if the Goblin Machine does hit your musketeer, the musketeer can survive it. Another fantastic answer is minions right on top of it. Obviously, the Goblin Machine cannot hit air, and the minions are inside the Goblin Machine rocket dead zone. Another very effective way of dealing with this Goblin Machine is with spam. The Goblin Machine can only hit single targets, so if you use a Skarmy, you're able to surround him and take him out very quickly. You want to do it as high up as possible so the rocket doesn't lock onto your tower. That's always a consideration with this card. Now, the Goblin Machine is a win condition, so new decks are going to get made with this card as the main focus point. A good rule of thumb, I would say, is if Giant Skeleton works in the deck, then this card will probably work in the same deck. This card is extremely powerful and definitely one to keep an eye on. Very quickly, I do just want to say, if you guys enjoy the sneak peek content, make sure to come over to the shop and use code OOfro. Code OOfro really supports the channel, and it allows me to keep doing these sneak peek videos. I really appreciate everyone using my code, but let's move on now to the Goblin Demolisher. The Goblin Demolisher is a 4 elixir rare card, and this card is a 2-in-1. It is a mixture between a bomber and wall breakers. So the Goblin Demolisher, at first it is a ranged attacker. It will throw dynamites at enemies, and it will only hit ground units. However, you can see on his health bar this yellow line. This yellow line indicates when he's above or below 50% health. When he's above 50% health, he's a bomber. When he's below 50% health, he then starts charging towards the tower and turns into a wall breaker. Once again, let's take a look at the stats, and you can see he actually has low damage. This means he's not able to one-shot goblins. He can one-shot spear goblins and skeletons, but normal goblins take 2 hits. In my opinion, the main benefit of this card though is when he turns into a wall breaker. And the reason why is because this death damage is actually area damage. So if this troop is on your tower, you need something more than a log to counter him, because that death damage will splash. Again, the demolisher cannot hit air, but when he's in the running state, again, that explosion can hit air. Troops also do not work against this card. If you place down a Skarmy and then he explodes, it's going to take out the Skarmy. So how do you counter this card? Well, there's a few different ways. First of all, a Musketeer. Once again, a great counter to this card. It can take out the demolisher fully, not even taking any damage. A defensive building is also ideal. When it drops below 50% health, it will charge towards the nearest building. So any defensive building works great. This one is a very goofy way of countering it, but I found it out, so I thought I would share. If your opponent plays the demolisher at the back, you can actually fireball it very quickly. When he's in that running state, he actually loses HP slowly, and you're able to fully counter it before it gets close to your tower with just a fireball. In terms of power level, this card is very balanced. Decks I see this card working well in is drill decks. Obviously, it can protect the drill, splashing onto the enemy tower, and then they still have to deal with the troop. Onto the third and final card, the Goblin Curse. This is a 2 elixir epic card, and this one is ridiculous. It makes a green puddle on the floor. If an enemy troop dies inside this puddle, it will then become a friendly goblin. That means a Skarmy can now become a goblin army and instantly win you the game. Let's take a look at the stats, and you can see it does very low damage. The damage is so low it cannot even one-shot a skeleton. But obviously the big advantage is it spawns you friendly goblins. As well, it has a damage amplifier. So what does that mean? Well, here's a side-by-side comparison. An ice golem is coming at me down both lanes. One lane we goblin curse and the other lane we do nothing. Now the ice golem that is inside the goblin curse is taking the damage from the spell itself, is then taking the damage from the tower, and is taking an extra 50% damage from the tower. And that works with all sources of damage. This makes a massive difference because the ice golem is not able to hit my tower, whereas on the other side it did. Obviously the goblin curse is a spell, so it's very hard to counter a spell. So instead I'm going to show you just some insane interactions. First of all, this is the best answer to a graveyard. It can fully counter a graveyard, and it spawns enough goblins to give you a counter push big enough to take your opponent's tower, which is insane. Against a minion horde, you can see the tower takes out the minions and turn them into a goblin, keeping the minion horde inside the curse, being able to fully counter the minion horde. Even though the goblin curse is a small spell, it actually cannot fully counter a goblin bow. It does damage a little bit too slowly, and the goblins can get a hit. The same goes for wall breakers. One of the wall breakers will get taken out, the other one will hit the tower. Against a witch, the witch obviously spawns skeletons, but the skeletons turn against her and take her out. There are a ton of positive elixir traits you can get with this card, and for 2 elixir, it is super powerful. A lot more sneak peeks coming soon. Subscribe.